Appendix 2 of the Abdullah Yusuf Ali translation is on the Tawrah. See Surah 5, Ayat 44. The Tawrah is frequently referred to in the Quran. It is well to have a clear idea as to what it exactly means. Vaguely, we may say that it was the Jewish scripture. It is mentioned with honor as having been, in its purity, a true revelation from Allah. Now, unlike what what they call the Old Testament, the order herein is a little bit different. Now, there's different variations with some of this, but we have 24 books. We have Brashit, Genesis, Shemut, Exodus, Wikra, Leviticus, Bumdaber, Numbers, Debrim, Deuteronomy, and that's Tawrah. You know, the law. Nebiim are the prophets. I think it's don't they say that 12 of them are listed as the same book in the division? You do have 5 for the first, but so Yahusha, Joshua. Shupthim, Judges. Shemuel, Shemuel, so Samuel as one book. Malkim, Malkim, I forget how to say the numbers, but they go in the alphabetical order for the numbers. So 1st and 2nd Kings. Yeshua, Isaiah, Yirmiyah, Jeremiah, Yitches, Paul, Ezekiel, Husha, Hosea, Yual, Joel, Amos, Amos, Obadiah, Una, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Nachum, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Chagi, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. So, you know, those 3, 3, 3, 3. So those last ones are all as the same book. We have Ketubim, the writings. Tahilim, Psalms. Mushli, Proverbs. Ayub, Job. Shir, Hashirim, the Song of Songs. Ruth, Akah, Lamentations. Kahlat, Ecclesiastes. Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Debris, Hemim, okay, so 1st and 2nd Chronicles would be in the same book, and some of the others I think you see combined also. But the point is not so much, it's the original to whatever prophet. Whether these prophets are a good list, whether the 83 with the books that could have been included, most of them were, but some of them weren't. That's not really the point that is being made when we say that we believe in the Tawrah. To translate it by the words the Old Testament is obviously wrong. The Old Testament is a Christian term applied to a body of old Jewish records. The Protestants and the Roman Catholics are not agreed precisely as to the number of records to be included in the canon of the Old Testament. They use the term in contradistinction to the New Testament, whose composition we shall discuss in Appendix 3. Nor is it correct to translate Tawrah as the Pentateuch, a Greek term meaning the 5 books. These are the first 5 books of the Old Testament known as Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They contain semi-historical and legendary narrative of the history of the world from the creation to the time of the arrival of the Jews in the Promised Land. There are in them some beautiful ideals, but there are also stories of incest, fraud, cruelty, and treachery, not always disapproved, by the writers. A greater part of the Mosaic law is embodied in this narrative. The books are traditionally ascribed to Moses, but it is certain they were not written by Moses, or in an age either contemporary with Moses or within an appreciable distance of time from Moses. They were either in their present form, probably compiled sometime after the return of the Jews from the Babylonian captivity. The decree of Cyrus, Kurash, the Qarnayn, but permitting such return was 536 BCE. Some books now included in what they call the Old Testament, such as Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, were immediately written after the return of the captivity, Malachi being as late as 420 to 397 BCE. The compilers of the Pentateuch, of course, used some ancient material, some of the materials actually named Egyptian and Chaldean terms, are relics of local color and contemporary documents. But there are some ludicrous slips which show that the compilers did not always understand their material. Modern criticism distinguishes 2 distinct sources among the documents of different dates used by the editors. For the sake of brevity and convenience, they may be called Jehovistic and Elohistic. Then there are latter miscellaneous interpolations. They sometimes overlap and sometimes contradict each other. Logically speaking, the book of Joshua, which describes the entry into the Promised Land, should be bracketed with the Pentateuch, and many writers speak of the 6 books together as the Hexateuch, the Greek term for 6 books. The Apocrypha contain certain books which are not admitted as canonical in the English Bible, but the early Christians received them as a part of the Jewish scriptures, and the Council of Trent in 1545 to 1563 of the Common Era seems to have recognized the greater part of them as canonical. The statement in 2nd Esdras, written in about the 1st century of the Common Era, that the law was burnt, and Ezra, say about 458 to 457 BCE, was inspired to rewrite it. It's probably true as to the historical fact that the law was lost and that what we have now is no earlier than the time of Ezra, and some of it is a good deal later. So far as we have spoken in the Christian view of what they call the Old Testament, What is the Jewish view? The Jews divide their scripture into three parts. The law, Torah, the prophets, Nebiim, and the writings, Ketuvim. The corresponding Arabic words would be Tawrah, Nebiim, Kutub. This division was probably current in the time of Jesus. In Luke 24:44, Jesus refers to the law, the prophets, and the Psalms. In other places, like Matthew 7:12, Jesus refers to the law and the prophets as summing up the whole scripture. In the Old Testament book, 2 Chronicles 34:30, the reference to the book of the covenant must be to the Torah, or to the original law. This is interesting as the Quran frequently refers to the covenant with reference to the Jews. The modern Christian terms, Old Testament and the New Testament, are substitutes for the older terms, Old Covenant and New Covenant. The Samaritans, who claim to be the real Christians of Israel and disavow the Jews as schismatics from their law of Moses, only recognize the Pentateuch. Oh, the real children of Israel. Okay, did I say Christians? The real children of Israel and disavow the Jews only recognize the Pentateuch, of which they have their own version slightly different from that in the Old Testament. The view of the school of higher criticism is radically destructive. According to Renan, it is doubtful whether Moses was not a myth. The two versions of sacred history existed, different in language, style, and spirit, and they were combined together into a narrative of the reign of into a narrative in the reign of Hezekiah, BCE 727 to 697. This forms the greater part of the Pentateuch as it exists today, including the greater part of Deuteronomy and Leviticus. In the reign of Josiah, about 622 BCE, certain priests and scribes with Jeremiah the prophet promulgated a new code pretending that they had found it in the temple. 2 Kings 22:8. This law, Tawrah, was the basis of Judaism. The new law then founded in Palestine. Now, Judaism's, you can actually put the return about 540, and maybe if you say Judaism's started about then, but it's Judaism by title. It was sort of the basis, but also the prevailing Jewish the ways of the people of Yehuda, but you know, the region that the Romans renamed as Palestine. The new religion then founded in Palestine, it was further completed by the sacerdotal and Levitical Torah, compiled under the inspiration of Ezekiel, say about 575 BCE, and contained mainly the book of Leviticus, with scattered fragments in Exodus, Numbers, and Joshua. We are entitled to accept the general results of a scientific examination of documents, probabilities, and dates, even though we reject the premise that we believe to be false, that Allah does not send inspired books through inspired prophets. We believe that Moses existed, that he was an inspired man of God, that he gave a message which was afterwards distorted or lost, that attempts were made by Israel at various times to reconstruct that message, and that the Tawrah, as we have it, is in view of the statement of 2nd Esdras, no earlier than the middle of the 5th century BCE. And so we believe in revelation and inspiration, not the idea that you know, people, that God has no role in such things, and that people, you know, just are supposed to do best what they can, compiling writing spiritual books. Now, you do your best writing spiritual books, but yeah. The primitive Torah must have been in Old Hebrew. Well, it's called Aramea at that time, from everything that I've seen at that time, from the time of Moses up until the time of Jesus. I mean, this is this people's language and this people's language and this people's language. So you would have said, well, this is the language of the Hebrews and this, and well, it's still the language of everybody else. So, yeah. That's been in the Old Hebrew, but there's no Hebrew manuscript of the Old Testament, which can be dated with certainty earlier than 916 of the Common Era. Hebrew ceased to be a spoken language with the Jews during or after captivity, and by the time we come to the period of Jesus, most cultivated Hebrews used the Greek language and others used Aramea, including Syriac and Chaldee. What do they mean by Chaldee? But Syriac, was a distinct form. That was that you could say is a different language. Latin or local dialects. There were also Arabic versions. For historical purposes, the most important versions were the Greek version, known as the Septuagint, and the Latin version, known as the Vulgate. The Septuagint was supposed to have been prepared by 70 or 72 Jews. Septuaginta, 70 working independently, and at different times, the earliest portion dating from 284 BCE. This version was used by the Jews of Alexandria and the Hellenized Jews who were spread over all parts of the Roman Empire. The Vulgate was a Latin translation made by the celebrated father of the Christian Church, St. Jerome, from the Hebrew early in the 5th century of the Common Era, superseding older Latin versions. Neither the Septuagint nor the Vulgate have an absolutely fixed or certain date. Now, the Catholic Septuagint includes more than the 5 books, and they came up with a whole Greek version of the whole thing, which is misleading translations in part, but it's a few hundred years later is still, like 500 years later is still significantly, but yeah. Was it the 300s or I think it was the 200s of the Common Era? The Catholics wrote a Greek Old Testament, what they called it, superseding the older Latin versions. Neither the Septuagint nor the Vulgate. Okay, the present standard text of the Vulgate is accepted by the Roman Catholic Church, was issued by Pope Clement the 8th, 1592 to 1605. Now I do accept the 450 of the Common Era date for the Vulgate. But there's indication that there's been changes since that, so yeah. Well, not just, manuscript evidence that indicates that it will be seen, therefore, that there's no standard text of what they call to be the Old Testament in its Hebrew form. Biblical Hebrew or other ones, right? The versions differ from each other frequently in minor particulars and sometimes in important particulars. The Sopharim, about 2,000 years ago, did tend to narrow things down to basically 3 versions have developed from that. And they all have the same number of rows, the same number of columns, and the same number of letters. So the Pentateuch itself is only a small portion of what they call the Old Testament. It is in narrative form and includes the laws and regulations associated with the name of Moses, but probably compiled and edited from older sources by Ezra or Esdras, Arabic Uzair, in the 5th century BCE. As Renan remarks in the preface to his History of the People of Israel, the definite constitution of Judaism may be dated only from the time of Ezra. The very early Christians were divided into 2 parties, One was a Judaizing party, which wished to remain in adherence to the Jewish laws and customs, or recognizing the mission of Jesus. The other, led by Paul, broke away from the Jewish customs and traditions. Ultimately, Pauline Christianity won, but both parties recognized what people call the Old Testament in its present form in one or another of its varying versions as scripture. It was the merit of Islam that it pointed out that as scripture, it was of no value, well, of questionable value, be a better way to put it. Although it recognized Moses as an inspired messenger and his original law having validity in his period until it was superseded. In its criticism of the Jewish position, it said, in effect, you've lost your original law, even what you have now as its substitute. You do not honestly follow. It is not better now that an inspired teacher is living among you, that you should follow him rather than quibble about over uncertain text. But the Jews in the prophet's time and sense learned a great deal by the Talmud, our body of oral exposition, reduced to writing in different schools of doctors and learned men. Talmud in Hebrew is connected with the Arabic root tilmid, disciple or student. The Talmudists took the divergent texts of the Old Testament and in interpreting them by massive traditional commentary and legendary lore, evolved the standard body of teaching. The Talmudists are of special interest to us as, in the 6th century of the Common Era, just before the preaching of Islam, they evolved the Masorah, which may be recognized as the body of authoritative Jewish hadith, to which references are to be found in passages addressed to the Jews in the Quran. The first part of the Talmud is called the Mishnah, a collection of traditions and decisions prepared by Rabbi Judah about 150 of the Common Era. He summed up the results of the great mass of previous rabbinical writings. The Mishnah is the second law. The Arabic Thani is the second. It bounded heavy burdens, grievous to be borne, and laid them on men's shoulders. See Matthew, according to Matthew 23:4. There were also many targums, or paraphrases of the law, among the Jews. Targum is connected in root with the Arabic tarjama he translated. There were many targums, mostly in Aramaic, and they constituted the teaching of the law to the masses of the Jewish people. The correct if a lot of Jewish prayer books, you'll see 4 very distinct language periods, which it's like you have to learn a whole new language. Like French and Latin and German aren't really the same, but they're about half or so the same as the other. So and if you know Latin, you're going to figure out a lot of Greek. So that's the sort of analogy you have with the some of them, most of them, you don't have that variety, but I've seen it. The correct translation of the Tawrah is therefore the law. In its original form, it was promulgated by Moses and is recognized in Islam as having been an inspired book, but it was lost before Islam was preached. What passed as the law with the Jews in the prophet's time was the mass of traditional writing, which I've tried to review in this appendix. Now, we've seen that in the reference the Bhagavad Gita, 760 has a similar thing. Religion kind of dissipates, and then God sends a messenger to make sure that we're not left astray, right? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.